In terms of the 2010 Formula 1 season, there are two main talking points. The first is Fernando is faster than you, and the second is not bad for a number 2 driver. The first being a coded message to Felipe Massa to get Fernando Alonso into the lead of the German Grand Prix, and the second being Mark Webber getting all passive-aggressive with his team because they'd done some stuff with a front wing. I covered this in a video earlier. There is a third one though, and the third one is what kind of kicked all of that second bit off. It's something I do need to look at in the future because it's kind of where the breakdown in the relationship began with Webber and Red Bull, and the world started to see how Red Bull worked. Some might call it the golden boy policy, how one driver seemingly gets to do whatever the hell they want to, and the other is just there to drive the second car or get used as a punching bag. First Webber, now Perez. Not my words, but it's how people might see it. Basically, at the Turkish Grand Prix of that year, and I brushed on this in the not bad for a number 2 driver video last week. It was last week, wasn't it? But basically, Vettel collided with Webber. Vettel was out of the race, but Webber was able to finish third with a car that had a chunk of the floor missing. But at the time, I remember it being written in the media that Red Bull was effectively blaming Webber for the crash. Not outright blaming him, but just heavily implying it. But there's actually a fourth incident on top of that, and it's one that's largely forgotten, but it might be where one of the championship contenders in the 2010 season actually lost the title. And that's the Valencia Grand Prix, the European Grand Prix at Valencia in 2010, where Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton had a bit of a kerfuffle behind the safety car. The Valencia circuit. One of the 3 tracks in the F1 games of the time that I hated driving. The other 2 being the circuits in Korea and India. Just didn't like the tracks. Didn't like the layouts, didn't like the flow, just found them in general boring to drive. Built for the 2008 European Grand Prix, it was situated in the dock area and was a bit of a backtrack from Bernie because he'd made a statement 2 or 3 years before saying that the days of a country hosting 2 races were over. Now, specifically what this means is a country hosting 2 races with one of those races being called the European Grand Prix. So you could still have the San Marino Grand Prix and the Italian Grand Prix, that's fine, 2 races in the same country with different names, but a German Grand Prix at Hockenheim and a European Grand Prix at the Nürburgring was a solid 9 out of 10. Or the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, European round at Donington. I hope all of that makes sense. And Bernie didn't want to sign any contracts regarding the Valencia race until after the 27th of May 2007, because there were going to be local elections in the area, and he wanted to make sure that the right government ended up in power. He didn't want to end up signing a contract only for the new government, if there was going to be one, saying, yeah, we're not racing. The layout was a cacophony of 25 turns over a 3.3 mile long circuit, so about the same length as Silverstone really, but way less fun to drive. Despite being over twice the length of Monaco, overtaking was still at a premium with 1 proper overtaking place, that being at the end of the back straight. Maybe turn 2 if you get a good exit out the final corner, and also turn 17 if you get a good run out of 14. With today's cars, oh my god, this place will be terrible. At least that's an episode of Can F1 Handle ready for the Christmas break then. Still, despite being a super tight circuit, top speeds nudged 200 miles an hour. And again, despite being a super tight circuit, there was enough runoff. And Robert Kubica said that to win here, you needed a car with good traction and also a car that was pretty easy on the tyres. But when they changed the rules around for 2011, so DRS edition and the switching of Japanese Bridgestone to Italian Pirelli, there was criticism levelled at the track, because out of the 27 passes of the 2011 Grand Prix at Valencia, 22 of those were DRS assisted. But the number we need to concern ourselves with here is the remaining 5 non-DRS overtakes. That was the lowest of the season. But we need to concern ourselves with the race in 2010, a race that Lewis Hamilton entered as the championship leader. Lewis had 109 points versus Jensen, who had 106. Webber was another 3 points back on 103, while Alonso was 4th on 94. Vettel, meanwhile, was 5th on 90. Alonso wasn't totally out of it, but he needed a good result, and he was one of 2 drivers in the top 5 at that time that hadn't won more than 1 race, Vettel being the other. Alonso hadn't won since the season opening Bahrain Grand Prix. Vettel had won in Malaysia, but Webber had his 2 wins in Spain and Monaco, Hamilton had won Turkey and Canada, and Button had won Australia and China. The drivers involved were also pretty coy with their media statements going into the race. Hamilton had written himself off as a championship contender, and Button was also concerned with McLaren losing momentum. Vettel, meanwhile, had suffered reliability issues with his Red Bull, but wasn't writing anything off yet, with McLaren also wary of a Red Bull resurgence as they approached the mid-part of the season. Ferrari, Mercedes and Renault had also added the blown diffuser to their cars for this race, which Alonso believed would help them at this particular type of track. Part of the upgrade also changed the exhaust assembly, and they also added larger radiators to deal with the heat. Mercedes' blown diffuser system was designed purely to just blow air and nothing else, while Renault had designed theirs with heat protection in mind. Meanwhile, Red Bull had trialled an F-duct system similar to what McLaren was running and decided to run it for the weekend. In qualifying, the Red Bulls were the class of the field. Vettel's pole time a tenth or so ahead of Webber and nearly half a second from Hamilton in third. Alonso was fourth at his second home race of the season, with teammate Massa behind him in fifth. Kubica was sixth, having set the fastest time in the first qualifying session of the three, and Button was seventh, followed by the two Williams cars of Hülkenberg and Barrichello, with Petrov in the Renault bringing up the rear of the top 10. Bridgestone had brought the super soft tyres and the medium tyres for this particular Grand Prix, and I actually don't know a lot about the slick tyres of this period, sort of 2009-2010, before they switched over to Pirelli. Bridgestone and Michelin during the tyre war, Goodyear and Bridgestone during the other tyre war, and the Pirellis of now, oh yeah, all that stuff's quite easily found on the internet, but yeah, no clue from this period. I mean, someone will know in the comments. Which was better? How did they work? Let me know. The race got underway and Vettel converted his pole position. Hamilton jumped Webber and tried to have a go at Vettel, but light contact was made. Then Webber hit Button and dropped down to 8th, so by the end of the first 3 and a bit miles, the top 10 was Vettel, Hamilton, Alonso, Massa, Kubica, Button, Barrichello, Hülkenberg, Webber, and Buemi. Trulli had, at the end of the first lap, gone for a new nose, and then at the end of lap 5, he was in again to try and fix a problem with the gearbox, a problem that involved him having to turn the engine off so they could look at it. He'd finished 4 laps down in the end. Webber, meanwhile, had pitted at the end of lap 7 to change his tyres and sort of do something with his strategy, but there was a problem putting one of the wheels on, so he lost loads of time and would emerge in like 19th or something. But his race was about to go from bad to a lot worse than worse. On lap 9, Webber was catching up to Kovalainen's Lotus, the Lotus being one of the 3 new teams on the grid that year. As they came up towards turn 12, Webber pulled out of the slipstream to try and get around him, but Heikki hit the brakes and Webber had nowhere to go. He struck the back of the Lotus, had the front end of his car jump up in the air, strike an advertising board, and slam back into the ground upside down. The momentum of the crash righted the car and Webber ended up skidding to the outside of the turn 12 escape zone, bouncing off the tyre wall on the outside of the corner. What had happened was Heikki was trying to move back towards the racing line, and Webber hadn't anticipated that the Lotus had tried to brake slightly earlier than the Red Bull, although it does like Heikki is moving a little bit too much than he probably should have been. Webber had initially tried to go to Heikki's left, but then changed his mind and tried to go to the right, but the Lotus was already on the brakes, and there was no avoiding the accident. Now some of you might be wondering, hey Hayden, don't you sometimes buy images for these videos? So, you know, come on talking man on the internet, where's the picture of the crash? Well, I went on Alamy, and there's no picture of the crash. There's pictures of Webber, there's pictures of Webber's car, there's pictures from the Grand Prix, no pictures of the crash available. I then went on to Getty Images, and even if they did have one, lol, no, I'm not paying those prices. But let's be honest, the footage is easily found online, and, you know, you've probably seen it a million times before, so on this occasion, I don't think you're actually missing out on anything, as condescending as that sounds. The safety car had to come out for all of this, and this is where the controversy begins. Kubica, Jensen, Barrichello, Hulk, Buemi, Sutil, Liuzzi, De La Rosa and Chandhok all made their pit stops, while others, including Hamilton, had to stay out because they were just too late to come in. But when Hamilton approached turn 1, he had a moment of confusion regarding what he could and couldn't do. Hamilton was allowed to pass the safety car given his position on track, so long as he did it before a certain point. Vettel had already cleared it, he was already gone, so Hamilton was the next one in line, and he basically had this moment of, well, what's legal here? Am I allowed to pass it or am I not? So he was going flat out, he saw the safety car, he started to slow down, sped up a little bit, slowed down, and then eventually he drove past it. Alonso was the next one in the queue. This isn't me trying to get Lewis off the hook or anything, this is just what might have been going through his head at that particular time. The spatial awareness to be able to pull off deliberately putting Alonso behind him and getting himself in front of the safety car before it was illegal to pass him would have been too much to even bother attempting. Basically, there is a white line at the end of the pit exit that runs across the track. This is the safety car line, and when the safety car comes out, if it passes that line, it is officially on the track and you can't overtake it. Lewis hesitated and then overtook the safety car. The BBC's commentators saw what he did and immediately said that he'd done a big no-no. But as Lewis and Seb had already passed the safety car, they were able to go around and pit and get a free pit stop. Vettel stopped for fresh tyres while Lewis needed a new front wing after that first lap tap. TLDR is, the way things worked out is that Seb and Lewis passed the safety car, went round and got their pit stop, but the Ferraris of Alonso and Massa and the Renault of Kubica were the first to line up behind the safety car. The others had enough notice to get into the pits and get some new tyres, so the train formed with such little gap between the cars. So when Alonso, Massa and Kubica finally pitted, they were dumped right down the field. On lap 14, the safety car came in and they were able to go racing again. Alonso was livid and he made a complaint about the safety car and specifically Hamilton, which I think he did behind the safety car in the opening couple of minutes it was out. With the lap counter in the 20s, the graphics started appearing that Hamilton was under investigation and it looked like it would be a slam dunk penalty. But for a slam dunking penalty which you could just look at and just determine, it had taken an eternity to get to that point. Something similar had happened at the Canadian Grand Prix between Vitaly Petrov and Pedro de la Rosa. Petrov had hit de la Rosa, caused a collision, and in that instance as well, the FIA took forever to apportion a penalty. Someone watching the race at that time has been able to give the timeline of how things happened on Fox Sports, the US broadcaster at the time. I don't know if it still is, but that's what was broadcasting it. The safety car incident happened on lap 10-11. The notice from the stewards on the TV screens with the little graphics saying that they were investigating car number 2 came on lap 23. On lap 25, the penalty was given, and on lap 27, Lewis served the drive-through that was apportioned to it. But he was able to maintain second place thanks to Kobayashi holding everybody up behind, which had allowed Lewis and Vettel to basically just gap everybody. Lewis was probably about, 75-80% alongside the safety car when the safety car reached that line of no return, and then obviously Hamilton went past, which left Alonso next in the queue, and he'd seen the McLaren absolutely bugger off into the distance while he had to wait. That was what got him annoyed. Schumacher, meanwhile, had been very tactical with his stops. He'd been on the harder compound tyres to start the race, but the rules say that the drivers have to use both compounds. When the safety car initially came out, he pitted and took on the softer rubber, but just before the safety car was due to come back in, he pitted a second time to get back onto the preferred compound and hopefully make his way back up the field as everybody else's tyres fell off. Hamilton made inroads on Vettel's lead towards the end of the race, but it was an easy enough win for the Red Bull. Hamilton clawed the gap back to 5 seconds while Button was able to finish third, 7 seconds behind Vettel. I know that the results here say otherwise, but we'll get to that in a second. The remainder of the top 10 was Barrichello in the Williams taking his best result of the season, and then it was Kubica, Sutil, Kobayashi, Alonso being 8th, Buemi and Rosberg. Schumacher scored his worst ever F1 finish, being down in 15th. Alonso had actually finished the race in 9th, but he was bumped back up to 8th when Button, Barrichello, Kubica, Sutil, Buemi, De La Rosa, Petrov, Liuzzi and Hülkenberg were slapped with a 5-second time penalty. They'd basically taken too long to get to the pits when the safety car was pulled out. Buemi was the only one affected by the time penalty, which put Alonso back up to 8th and gave him an extra 2 points versus what he would have got for 9th. But Alonso and Ferrari were still livid over what happened. They were angry that both Hamilton and Button had received penalties but were able to maintain their positions. They were also unhappy that even as a result of the penalties, Hamilton had extended his Drivers' Championship lead and McLaren had extended the Constructors' Championship lead, while both the Ferraris finished way down the order. And Alonso even went as far as to say that the race had been fixed. Some people online, and I've managed to find posts deep in the archives, suggest that Hamilton had deliberately held up Alonso to stop him overtaking the safety car as well, leaving Alonso to his fate, so to speak. Something like Hamilton was trying to be clever and get past the safety car just before he wasn't allowed to, with no time available for Alonso to do the same. But one thing to note here is that Kobayashi didn't pit until after the safety car had come in, and Kobayashi was able to pit and somehow end up finishing the race ahead of Alonso, despite Alonso being trapped behind him for God knows how long. If you look at the footage which shows the helicopter shot of the incident, if Lewis had kept his foot in and passed the safety car, some might think that Alonso could have just made it through as well. This then opens up an argument that, in the grand scheme of things, if Alonso had finished third in this race, assuming that's where he finished if he was able to pass the safety car as well as Hamilton, he'd have won the title. So add an extra 9 points to Alonso's tally for the season, he beats Vettel in the end by 7, if my maths is right. Alonso might have actually finished second in the race because of Hamilton changing his front wing in that pit stop. The title of this video might end up being called Is This Where Alonso Lost 2010, but if you look at it, it is dependent on whether he managed to get past the safety car as well as Hamilton, assuming Hamilton keeps his foot in, because then it would have been Vettel, Hamilton and Alonso that got past the safety car, got all the way around, got their free pit stop, and then it would have been Massa holding everybody up, and Alonso would have joined back at the front of the queue, in third, in front of Kobayashi, not been held up, and then at least finishes third, assuming everything goes well. And like I say, Hamilton pitting for that new front wing might have put Alonso back up into second. Alonso, after the race, said, "I think it was unreal, this result, and unfair as well. We respected the rules. We don't overtake under the yellows and we finished ninth. That is something to think about." It completely destroyed the race. Hopefully we can move forward, because after the victory of Vettel and podium for McLaren, ninth place is very little points for us. We need to apologise to the 60 to 70,000 people who came to see this kind of race. They gave a penalty already to Hamilton, but it was too late. 30 laps to investigate one overtake. I mean, it was 14, Fernando. Still a long time for that sort of slam dunk incident? Yes, I agree. Ferrari said, "A scandal. That's the opinion of so many fans and employees who are all in agreement. There is no other way to describe what happened during the European Grand Prix. The way the race and the incidents during it were managed raised doubts that could see Formula 1 lose some credibility again, as it was seen around the world." But Red Bull and other teams said they didn't see anything wrong with it. And even Piero Ferrari chimed in saying, "I am incredulous and bitter, not just for Ferrari but for the sport as a whole, as this is not the sort of thing one expects from professionals. For a long time now, I have also followed races and championships in the United States, where the appearance of the safety car is a frequent occurrence, but I have never seen anything similar to what happened today at the Valencia circuit. If it raises some doubts over the actions that led to a false race, to me that would seem more than reasonable." It would be the first bad result of 2 in a row for Alonso. At the next race, the British Grand Prix, which I did last week, I think, he'd be 14th and no scored. Then it was the Fernando is faster than you race at Germany immediately after Silverstone, which he would win. And then he'd have a non-score at Belgium where he could have eaten into the championship lead. But then he would get back-to-back wins in Monza and Singapore. Then a string of good results that set up the title showdown at Abu Dhabi, where Vettel ended up being, I think, the first person to only lead the championship at the race he won the championship, which is a mental statistic. But it'd be interesting to see what you lot think about this. Is this where Alonso lost the 2010 World Championship? Did Hamilton deliberately try to hold him up? Did McLaren cheat? Did all the other stuff that I've mentioned in this video sit with you in terms of agreement? Let me know down in the comments, and, try to keep the comments constructive, because you know what happens whenever Lewis Hamilton is involved. But anyway, a race that's food for thought. If you've been given some food for thought, then do like this video, and for more like this, get subscribed with L bell on so you never miss out on any future videos. Massive thanks as ever to the kind folk at Patreon. If you want to help contribute to the bill paying, photos and stuff like that, a link to Patreon is in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, and affiliate links. Or the super thanks down there too, if you just want to do a one and done donation, or memberships for a more overt way of supporting. So until next time, I've been AdmiralLaWind. Have a great day wherever you live in the world, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye.